My name's Sam. I'm 26, and it feels like I've been the one keeping my family afloat for as long as I can remember. Growing up, I was always the responsible one. Good grades, did my chores, never got into trouble. My younger brother, Mark, well, he was the favorite. Always has been. He's 2 years younger, and while I was busy doing everything right, he was getting spoiled. Better gifts, less pressure, the whole 9 yards. Don't get me wrong, I love my brother, but it's always been clear who the golden child is in my parents' eyes. Fast forward to adulthood, and not much has changed. I've been working steady jobs since I was old enough to work. Started with landscaping, now I'm a project manager for a tech company. It's not glamorous, but it's stable, and I've always been good at saving and staying on top of bills. Mark, on the other hand, took a different route. Always dreamed of being his own boss. Sounds cool, but in practice, it's been one failed venture after another. His last business, an electronics repair shop, went under about a year ago, leaving him in a tough spot. He's married to Lisa, and they have 2 little kids. They're great kids, and I try to be the cool uncle, but raising kids is expensive, and Mark and Lisa haven't exactly been the best with money. I get it. Times are hard. What I didn't get was how my parents decided to handle the situation. See, I've been renting the basement suite in my parents' house for the past few years. It's a good setup. Own entrance, small kitchen, enough space to live comfortably. I pay rent, chip in for groceries, help out when needed. Everything was smooth sailing until Mark's business went belly up. When Mark lost his shop, he and Lisa tried to make things work. They moved into a smaller apartment, cut back on expenses, but it wasn't enough. I knew things were tight, and I tried to help where I could, buying diapers, offering to babysit, that kind of thing. But apparently, it wasn't good enough. It didn't help that Mark always seemed to prioritize the wrong things. I once gave them money for groceries, only to see Lisa showing off a new handbag on social media the next day. Their priorities were a mystery to me. One day, I came home from work to find my parents waiting for me in the kitchen. My mom had that "we need to talk" look on her face, and I knew it wasn't good. They didn't waste any time breaking the news. Mark and his family were moving into the basement suite, my basement suite, and I was getting upgraded to the hobby room. Now, just so we're clear, the hobby room is this tiny, cluttered space where my mom keeps her sewing machine, piles of fabric, and a bunch of random junk. It's not exactly livable. I was stunned. What? How am I supposed to live in the hobby room? My dad, a man of few words, simply said, "It's the only thing that makes sense. They have kids, Sam. They need the space more than you do." I tried to keep my cool, but it wasn't easy. "I pay rent here," I said. "That's my apartment." My mom's response was classic. "It's our house, Sam. And as a family, we need to do what's best for everyone." Basically, their logic was that since it was their house, my contributions, rent, bills, helping out, didn't matter. Mark's needs came first, no questions asked. I wanted to argue, but it was clear their minds were made up. My mom was already talking about how they'd rearranged the hobby room to make it cozy for me, like throwing a pillow and blanket in there would magically make it okay. My dad just sat there, not interested in discussing it further. The worst part was that they didn't even ask me or ask for my opinion. They just decided, and I was supposed to go along with it. After that bombshell about the basement suite, things went downhill fast. I tried to keep my head down and deal with it, but every little thing was a reminder that I wasn't a priority in my own family. The move happened in a whirlwind. One day the basement was my home, the next it was overrun with toys, baby gear, and boxes. I was stuck trying to cram my life into the so-called hobby room. Calling it a room was generous. It was more like a glorified storage closet, barely enough space for a single bed. No window, no proper door, no privacy. I tried to make it work, I really did. But every day I felt more like an afterthought. Mark and Lisa settled in like they owned the place, and my parents acted like everything was fine. Like I wasn't shoved into a closet. I'd come home from work to find toys scattered everywhere, the kitchen a disaster, no sense of privacy at all. And the food? They barely left anything for me. I was trying to keep it cool, brush off the stupid details, but it was building up inside me. It started to affect my focus and productivity at work. So, I tried to talk to my parents. "Look, I get that Mark and Lisa are going through a hard time," I started. "But this isn't fair. I pay rent, I help out, and now I'm stuck in a storage room while they get the whole basement?" My dad didn't even look up from his phone. "It's temporary," he mumbled. "How temporary?" I asked. "As long as they need," my mom said simply, like that explained everything. And that was it. No negotiation, no acknowledgement of how unfair this was, just a vague promise that things might change someday. To make things worse, Mark didn't seem to appreciate what he was being given. I'd hear him and Lisa arguing late at night about money, the kids, whatever else. It was hard not to feel resentful. Here I was, giving up my space so they could have a roof over their heads, and they couldn't even keep it together. One night, I overheard them arguing because Mark had splurged on jewelry for Lisa, claiming he wanted to cheer her up, even though they hadn't restocked the kids' formula. It made me question why I was even helping at all. One day, I came home to find my nephew, Noah, playing in my room. He'd gotten into one of the fabric bins my mom left in there and was pulling out spools of thread like they were toys. "Look, Uncle Sam," he shouted, holding up a tangled mess of yarn. "Hey, buddy," I said, trying to stay calm. "This isn't a playroom, okay? Can you go back downstairs?" "Of course," my mom overheard. "Sam, don't be so harsh," she said, swooping in to rescue Noah like I just scolded him for breathing. "He's just a kid." "I know he's a kid, but this is my space. What little of it I have," I replied. She just gave me that look, the one that says I'm being unreasonable, and ushered Noah out without another word. It wasn't just the kids, though. Mark and Lisa seemed to forget that I still lived there. When we ran out of groceries, which we did faster than before, since we have kids in the house, my mom would say, Mark didn't even bother to buy anything. The thing is, I don't even blame the kids. They're just little, and they don't know any better. But Mark and Lisa, they should have been bending over backward to show some gratitude. Instead, it felt like they saw me as this extra roommate who was just there to pick up the slack. Things finally came to a head a few weeks later. I was working from home, which was already a nightmare in that cramped, cluttered room. The noise from downstairs was unbearable. I could hear the kids running around, Mark yelling about something, and Lisa on the phone, talking loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. I lost it. I marched downstairs and said, "Can you guys keep it down? I'm trying to work up here." Mark gave me this incredulous look, like I was out of line for even asking. "It's not like we're doing it on purpose," he said. "What do you expect with 2 kids?" "I expect a little consideration," I shot back. "I gave up my apartment for you. The least you could do is not make it impossible for me to do my job." That's when my mom swooped in to play referee. "Sam, don't start a fight," she said. "They're doing the best they can." I couldn't believe it. I was the one who'd been displaced, the one bending over backward to accommodate everyone else, and yet somehow, I was the problem. That night, I realized I couldn't keep doing this. My parents clearly weren't going to stand up for me. Mark and Lisa weren't going to change, and as long as I stayed, I'd just keep getting pushed further and further into the background. The next day, I started looking for somewhere to stay. I couldn't afford to move out completely, not with how expensive rent is these days, but I found a cheap motel that offered short-term stays. It wasn't fancy, but it had everything I needed: a bed, a bathroom, and most importantly, peace and quiet. I booked it for a week to clear my head and figure out my next steps. That evening, I packed my stuff and sat down with my parents in the living room. "I'm going to stay somewhere else for a while," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. "I need some space to think and figure things out." My dad scoffed. "What's there to figure out? Your brother's family needs the basement, and we need you to pitch in for the house. You can't just walk away from your responsibilities." "My responsibilities?" I shot back. "My only responsibility was paying for my own space, and you gave that away without even asking me." Now you want me to stick around and pay for a house I'm barely allowed to exist in. Are you serious? Mom let out an exasperated sigh. It's not about that. It's about family. We all have to make sacrifices sometimes. Sacrifices? I repeated, my voice rising. I've been sacrificing for years. Paying rent, buying groceries, bailing you out whenever there's an emergency. And what do I get in return? A closet and a pat on the back for being such a good sport? Mom's tone shifted. Well, if that's how you feel, maybe it's for the best that you take a little time away. But don't be gone too long. You know we're counting on you. Counting on me? I exploded. For what? To keep enabling Mark's bad decisions? To keep cleaning up messes I didn't make? No, I'm done. Before they could say another word, I stormed out, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I got in my car. The first few days at the motel were blissful. No screaming kids, no dirty dishes, no passive-aggressive comments from my mom. I felt like I could actually breathe. But of course, the peace didn't last long. On the third day of my motel getaway, I got a text from my mom. Sam, where's the money for rent and groceries? We're counting on it to help Mike and the kids. I stared at my phone, dumbfounded. I wasn't even living there anymore, and she still expected me to contribute. I called her immediately. Mom, I'm not even at the house right now. Why would I pay rent? Her response was exactly what I should have expected. Because we're family, Sam. Mike and Lisa need that space and they can't afford it on their own. You know how tight things are for us. I couldn't hold back. Tight for you. You kicked me out of my own apartment without asking, and now you expect me to keep paying for it? That's insane. She handed the phone to my dad, who wasted no time laying into me. This is typical of you, Sam. Always thinking about yourself. Your brother is struggling, and all you can do is complain. Have some decency. Before I could respond, I heard Mark's voice in the background. Let me talk to him. Sam, Mark said, you don't get it. You don't have kids. You don't know what it's like to have mouths to feed and bills piling up. We're family. You're supposed to help. I lost it. You're right, Mark. I don't have kids. But I also don't expect everyone else to fix my problems for me. You're not my responsibility, and neither is your family. The call ended with my mom crying, my dad calling me selfish, and Mark muttering something about how I'd regret this. After that blow-up over rent, things went quiet for a couple of days. Quiet, but not calm. You know that feeling when you're just waiting for the other shoe to drop? That's where I was. I knew my family wasn't going to just let me walk away. Sure enough, a few days later, I got a text from my mom. We're having a family meeting Sunday. Everyone will be there. It's important. Now, when my mom says, family meeting, it's never really a meeting. It's more like an ambush. I knew this was going to be a bunch of people ganging up on me, but part of me thought maybe, just maybe, this would be a chance to actually explain my side. I showed up on Sunday, walking into the living room to find not just my parents and Mark, but also my aunts, uncles, and even a couple of cousins. It was like a mini family reunion, except the vibe was anything but festive. Everyone was sitting in a circle, and as soon as I walked in, I could feel the judgment. Sam, we're all here because we're worried about you, my mom started, putting on her concerned parent voice. Worried about me? I said, taking a seat. What exactly are you worried about? My dad jumped in. Your behavior lately. It's not like you, Sam. You're acting weird. Weird? Of course, that was the word they always used when I didn't do exactly what they wanted. How? I said. For not wanting to pay for a house I don't live in. For being upset that you kicked me out of my own apartment without asking. Sam, we're family, my mom said. Like that explained everything. Family sticks together, and right now, Mike needs our help. That's when Mark decided to chime in. I know this has been hard on you, he said, trying to sound reasonable, but you don't understand what it's like to have kids. Noah keeps asking why you don't visit anymore. Do you want me to tell him his uncle doesn't care about him? I swear I felt my blood pressure spike. Are you serious, Mark? You're going to use your kid to guilt trip me now? How about you tell him the truth, that I'm tired of being treated like an ATM and a doormat?" "Sam," my mom said, looking horrified. "That's uncalled for." "Uncalled for?" I said, turning to her. "What's uncalled for is the way you've treated me. I've been paying rent here for years. I've helped out with groceries, bills, whatever you needed. And the one time I ask for a little respect, I'm the bad guy. How is that fair?" One of my aunts decided to jump in at this point. "Sam, you've always been the responsible one. Your parents count on you because they know you'll step up. But this attitude of yours, it's not who you are." I wanted to laugh. Responsible, sure, but that didn't mean I wanted to be the family's punching bag forever. "Being responsible doesn't mean letting people walk all over me," I said. "And that's exactly what's been happening. You all act like I owe Mark and Lisa something just because they've got kids. But where were all of you when I needed help? Oh, right, you were busy telling me to step up." The room went quiet for a second, but then my dad spoke up. "This isn't about the past, Sam. It's about right now. Your brother is struggling and we're trying to hold the family together. Why can't you see that?" "Because no one asked me," I shouted. "You didn't come to me and say, 'Hey Sam, we're in a tough spot. Can we figure something out?' No. You just decided that my life didn't matter as much as Mark's. You didn't give me a choice." At this point, my mom started tearing up, which, let's be honest, was her go-to move whenever things didn't go her way. "I just don't understand how you can be so cold," she said. "We raised you better than this." "You raised me to put everyone else first," I said. "And look where that's gotten me. Living in a storage closet while Mark and Lisa take over my space, using my groceries, and expecting me to keep paying for it. How is that fair?" Mark tried to jump in again, but I cut him off. "Mark, let me ask you something. When you had your shop, did you ever help Mom and Dad with bills? Did you ever pitch in for groceries or anything else?" He looked uncomfortable. "That's different," he mumbled. "Oh, it's different," I shot back. "Because I can't count how many times I've helped you out with money, just for you to blow it on something stupid. Like when I bought groceries for your family, and Lisa magically ended up with a new Chanel bag the next day? Or when you were late on rent, and you still found a way to get her a spa gift card? Do you even realize how insulting that is?" Mark's face went red, but he didn't have a comeback. "No, it's not," I said. "You didn't help out when you were doing fine, but now that you're struggling, everyone expects me to pick up the slack. I'm done. I'm not paying another cent for that house. If you need money, figure it out like an adult." That's when my mom lost it. She started crying, full-on sobbing, while my dad glared at me like I'd just insulted the family name. "You're tearing this family apart," she wailed. "No," I said, standing up. "You did that when you decided Mark was more important than me." I walked out of the house without saying another word. As I got into my car, my phone started buzzing with messages from cousins and aunts, all telling me I was being selfish and immature. I didn't even bother reading them. After the so-called family meeting, I decided to keep my distance for a while. I didn't block anyone, but I stopped answering their calls and texts. I needed some time to think, to figure out my next steps without the constant guilt trips and manipulations. At first, it worked. A couple of weeks went by, and while my phone was still buzzing with the occasional, "Sam, call us," or "Why won't you talk to us?" message, I mostly ignored it. I even started to feel a little lighter, like maybe I could finally focus on myself for once. But then my mom did something I never saw coming. She called my workplace. I found out about my mom's call to my workplace when my manager pulled me aside during a break. "Hey Sam," he said, looking awkward. "We got a call from someone claiming to be your mom. She said you're dealing with some family issues and might need some time off." I just stared at him, completely blindsided. "What? No, I didn't ask for time off, and I have no idea why she would call." "Well, I figured that might be the case," my manager said, trying to sound understanding. "But she left a pretty detailed message. He mentioned some stuff about my brother and housing issues. I was mortified. My personal life, something I tried so hard to keep separate from work, was now out in the open thanks to my mom. I spent the rest of the day trying to focus, but all I could think about was how humiliating this was. That evening, I called her. "Mom, what the hell were you thinking?" "I was worried about you," she said, her tone defensive. "You haven't been answering our calls, and I thought maybe you needed help." "So you thought calling my boss was the solution?" I yelled. "Do you have any idea how unprofessional that makes me look?" "I didn't mean to embarrass you," she said, her voice wavering. "I just wanted them to understand what you're going through." "What I'm going through is because of you," I said bluntly. "You kicked me out of my home, ignored everything I said at the family meeting, and now you're interfering with my job. Enough is enough, Mom. Stay out of my professional life." She didn't take it well. She started crying again and handed the phone to my dad, who predictably called me selfish and ungrateful. "Your mom was trying to help," he said. "You don't have to treat her like this." "I wouldn't have to say anything if she hadn't crossed the line," I said. "This isn't okay, Dad. None of this is okay." But it didn't stop there. The next day, I started getting messages from extended family members, cousins, aunts, even people I hadn't talked to in years. Apparently, Mark had taken to social media to air our dirty laundry. He didn't mention me by name, but the posts were clearly about me. "Real family steps up when it matters," one post said. "Some people only care about themselves, even when their own blood is struggling." The comments were full of sympathy for Mark. "Stay strong," one person wrote. "You're doing the best you can, and that's all that matters. You don't need toxic people in your life," another said. Toxic. That's what I was now, apparently. At first, I tried to ignore it, but the more I scrolled, the angrier I got. Mark was out here playing the victim, painting me as some heartless villain, and no one, not a single person, was asking for my side of the story. I thought about responding, about posting my own version of events, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. The people commenting on his posts had already made up their minds. Besides, I wasn't about to turn this into a public spectacle. Instead, I decided to call Mark directly. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I asked as soon as he picked up. "What are you talking about?" he said. "The posts, Mark. Don't play dumb. You're out here trashing me on social media. And for what? Because I don't want to pay for your life anymore?" "I didn't name you," he said defensively. "If people assume it's about you, that's not my fault." "Cut the crap, Mark. We both know what you're doing," I said. "If you've got a problem with me, say it to my face. Stop hiding behind Facebook." "You think I don't have the right to vent?" he shot back. "You've left us hanging, Sam. We're family, and you just walked away." "I walked away because you and Mom and Dad pushed me out," I said, my voice rising. "You don't get to guilt me into fixing your problems, Mark. You're a grown man. Act like it." The call ended about as well as you'd expect. He hung up on me, and I knew then that any chance of salvaging our relationship was gone. But it didn't end there. Mark decided to escalate things. He showed up at my apartment, demanding to know why I was walking away from the family. He accused me of being selfish, of not understanding what it was like to struggle. I tried to explain, to make him see that I wasn't walking away, I was setting boundaries, that I couldn't keep sacrificing my own life while they treated me like an afterthought. But he didn't want to hear it. He was too caught up in his own victimhood, too convinced that I owed him something. That night, I sat in my apartment, replaying the conversation over and over. I knew I had nothing left to do with this family. I couldn't keep doing this. It wasn't just about the basement or the rent anymore. It was about the constant disrespect and entitlement. That night, I sent my parents a text. "I love you, but I can't keep living like this. I won't be contributing to rent or groceries anymore. I'm also stepping back from the family for a while. Please respect my decision and don't contact me unless it's urgent." I hit send and blocked their numbers. It wasn't easy, but I knew it had to be done. Predictably, my cousins, aunts, and uncles flooded me with texts, calling me selfish and accusing me of abandoning my family. Mark, of course, was the loudest. He started spreading lies about me, telling everyone I'd been hoarding money, living extravagantly, and that I'd left him and my parents in financial ruin. At one point, I heard from a mutual friend that Mark had even tried to contact my boss to warn them about how unreliable I was. It was petty and vindictive, but thankfully, my boss saw through the nonsense and shut it down. A few months later, Mark's bitterness and poor decisions finally caught up to him. He had burned so many bridges in his quest to get back at me that even the extended family started distancing themselves from him. Meanwhile, his lack of financial planning hit a new low. I heard through the grapevine that he and Lisa were evicted from the house they'd moved into after my parents couldn't keep up with the mortgage. It wasn't just the eviction. Mark's actions began unraveling his own life. Lisa, fed up with his behavior and unwilling to keep scraping by, took the kids and left him. He was left with no job, no family support, and no place to stay. When I found out, I'd be lying if I said I felt sympathy. It was hard to muster any after everything he'd put me through. His obsession with revenge had done nothing but dig him into a deeper hole. As for me, cutting ties with my family wasn't easy, but it turned out to be the best decision I'd ever made. I moved to a new apartment, focused on my career, and even started going to therapy to work through years of built-up resentment. It's been a few years now, and I'm doing better than ever. I have a great job, a supportive group of friends, and I'm finally starting to feel like I can be myself without judgment or expectation. The story of Mark and my parents taught me a valuable lesson about family and responsibility. Family isn't just about blood. It's about respect, support, and accountability. And sometimes, the healthiest thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from the people who are holding you back. I haven't spoken to Mark or my parents in years. I don't know what they're doing now, and honestly, I don't care. I've moved on, and I'm finally at peace. I have a life that is truly my own, and that's all that matters. Story 2. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. This has been bothering me for weeks, so I need to get it off my chest. My 16-year-old sister-in-law regularly used my prescription skincare products without my consent, disregarding my explicit boundaries, and eventually burned herself with chemicals. Was it right of me to hold her and her family responsible, or did I come off as overly harsh? 7 months ago, my 26-year-old wife and her 28-year-old husband finally purchased our first home. It's not a fancy location, but it's comfortable. For us, moving in together was a big step. Having our own place has been wonderful, but it has also been very draining. Before you are responsible for house maintenance, you have no idea how much labor it takes. I've hardly had time to breathe because of unpacking and attempting to make the place seem like home. Nevertheless, I was pleased with our achievements. That is, until my sister-in-law began using our home as a hangout for herself. Allow me to introduce the scene. Sarah, my 16-year-old sister-in-law, recently obtained her driver's license. She has been dropping by our place as if nothing were wrong. I found it to be sweet at first. She merely wanted to hang out with her brother, I assumed. Then, however, it became a lot. She began to arrive at our door without warning, and it seemed like she was there every other day. She would occasionally not even knock. She simply let herself in. If it was an unlocked door, she would pretend to live there by settling down on our couch and browsing through her phone. I made an effort to ignore it. After all, she's a teenager, but I was getting tired of it. She has no idea what limits are, which exacerbates the situation. Not at all. She will take over the TV remote like she owns the home, raid our refrigerator, and utilize our belongings without permission. And it goes beyond what she does. It's the way she acts. I can't help but feel like she's making these snide little remarks about me. She used to quip, "You know, my brother is still mine," for instance, with this phony, endearing smile. At the time, I dismissed it with a laugh. However, the more she visited, the more those remarks began to accumulate. It was unclear to me whether she was kidding or whether she truly felt a sense of territorial attachment to her brother. Whatever the case, it annoyed me. The last straw was last Friday. She arrived immediately after supper and said, "I just don't feel like being at home." So she asked if she could spend the night. The thought didn't appeal to me, but I also didn't want to be the villain. With a shrug, my spouse stated that was all right, so I did what I was told. Since our guest bathroom isn't yet fully furnished, I told her to use ours when she asked if she might take a shower. I thought it was inconsequential. After taking a shower and watching a movie or something, she would retire to bed. However, things didn't go as planned. I now spend money on skincare and hair care products. I use high-quality products that work since I have a difficult time managing my hair. My shampoo costs $27, and the conditioner that goes with it is also not inexpensive. In addition, I use a prescription cream as part of my skincare regimen to address my skin concerns. Since it's medicinal and shouldn't be used by anybody else, I keep it hidden in a small pharmacy bag. These goods are more than simply pricey. For me, they are indispensable. My jaw almost fell on the floor when I entered the bathroom after she had bathed. My shampoo bottle was half empty. My skincare supplies were strewn all over the counter like someone had broken in, and the conditioner was almost completely empty. They had even opened my prescription cream. I was furious. "Who does that?" I went straight up to her. "Did you use my shampoo and conditioner?" I questioned her. She disputed it. She said no right in front of me. She simply shrugged when I pointed to the empty bottles, despite the fact that the proof was right there. "Did you use this cream?" I then inquired. "It is prescribed. It isn't for use by others." She denied it once more. She pretended that I was making a ridiculous accusation against her, despite the fact that everything had been shifted on the counter. I was furious, but I made an effort to remain composed. "Look, I'm not angry, but you can't use my belongings," I informed her. "Not my prescription cream in particular. It is not safe for you to use since it contains medication. Please remember to bring your own goods the next time." She rolled her eyes at me rather than saying she was sorry. She whispered, "It's only a cream. Avoid becoming self-centered." Then, as if I had done something wrong, she left the restroom. It seemed unbelievable to me. I was allowing her to spend the night in my house, use my restroom, and feel at home. She even dared to suggest that I was being irrational. I let it go for the evening since I didn't want to cause a huge deal. I assumed that was the end of it when she departed the following morning without saying anything. However, it wasn't. I noticed something strange when she came over again, this time without warning. To prevent repeat incidents, I had put my items in a drawer, but they were back on the counter when I went to the restroom. It's less than previously, and the prescription cream was obviously tampered with. Even though I explicitly instructed her not to, I knew she had been using them once more, and then I was finished. I was enraged, but I refrained from confronting her at the moment to avoid causing a quarrel during her stay. That night, I felt degraded in my own house. I explained what had been going on to my spouse. He felt sorry for her, but he was also apprehensive about confronting her. He said, "She's just a kid. Perhaps she is unaware of how much it annoys you." "That wasn't the point," I told him. "She is 16, not 6. She is aware that using someone else's belongings without permission is wrong, and even though she was first unaware, she disregarded me when I ordered her to stop. It's not a coincidence. It's a decision. We made the decision to establish some limits. I informed him that I no longer felt at ease with her dropping by without warning. She would need to call beforehand if she wanted to come. She was also prohibited from using my items or our restroom going forward, for a period. My spouse concurred, but we both knew that this discussion would not be well received. After that, I assumed everything would settle down, but I had no idea that this was only the beginning. By Tuesday, my husband and I were having supper at his parents' place. To be honest, I was still upset at his sister's antics, so I wasn't really eager to go. I decided to avoid any drama, smile sweetly, and keep my distance from her. However, as soon as she entered the room, I realized something was off. She had furious breakouts all over her face, which was red and peeling. It seemed awful, like really awful. Initially, I truly felt sorry for her. I thought she could have overdone it with a new product or experienced an adverse response to anything. Before I could ask her if she was all right, she turned to face me and gave me a glare as if I had personally ruined her skincare regimen. Loud enough for everyone at the table to hear, she exclaimed, "This is all your fault." I went cold. "Hold on, what?" She continued to glare at me while crossing her arms. "I didn't know your skincare products might ruin my face." Completely caught off guard, I blinked at her. It took me a while to realize what she was even discussing. "I had no idea you were using it," I said, attempting to seem calm. "Don't use my prescription cream, I told you." The floodgates opened at that point. She went into full-fledged rage, accusing me of ruining her skin and failing to warn her that my products were extremely potent. She gave the impression that I had purposefully deceived her into taking something harmful. As all was going on, I sat there trying to understand how she had made this seem like my responsibility. My father-in-law spoke out before I had a chance to speak. "Why didn't you inform her that using it was unsafe?" He made the demand while glaring at me as if I had made a mistake. "She is only 16. She has no greater knowledge." I was taken aback. "I did advise her against using it." I spoke aggressively. Without asking, she searched through my belongings. "It's not as if I didn't tell her," he fired back. "The grown-up is you. You need to have exercised greater responsibility." I was unable to reply at this moment because I could feel my blood boiling. My spouse got right in. He echoed precisely what I told him the previous night when he stated, "She's 16, not 6. She is wise enough to avoid using prescription medications without authorization and searching through someone else's personal belongings." His father was not amused. "To solve this, you should at least take her to the doctor," he remarked, turning back to face me. "The least you can do is this." It was so ridiculous that I nearly burst out laughing. "I apologize, but she disregarded me and used something she shouldn't have. Therefore, I won't be paying for a doctor." I said, "I'm not responsible for it." My mother-in-law added her voice, then making matters worse by attempting to act as a mediator. "Let's not make a big deal out of this. It's only a miscommunication." She had no intention of stirring up controversy. With a raised voice, I added, "She went through my drawers." This was no coincidence. I instructed her not to use my prescription cream, and she did. From there, the discussion took a turn for the worst. Whenever I attempted to defend myself, they always responded by saying that I should have been more understanding or that, as the adult, I ought to have handled things better. My spouse seemed to be the only one listening to me, and he finally put an end to it. He stated strongly that we would not be paying for anything. "My wife is not to blame for this. Sarah is free to utilize other people's items if she so chooses." After that, there was silence at the table, but the atmosphere was oppressive. I didn't eat much the remainder of the night, and we left as soon as it was courteous to do so. I expressed my frustration to my spouse on the way home. They seemed to be denying that what she did was bad. I said, "I didn't baby her, so they're making me the bad guy." He groaned, and his expression reflected my frustration. He said that they had always spoiled her. "She gets away with anything since she is the youngest. They believe that blaming someone else is simpler than holding her responsible." I assumed the following several days would be peaceful. Then my husband's mother called him. It seems that ever since the supper, his sister had been constantly griping about me. She said that because I was attempting to establish my control, I was possessive of my belongings and didn't want her to utilize them. Who even speaks like that, really? She gave the impression that I had been waiting for her to make a mistake so I could attack her. I felt both angry and perplexed when my husband revealed what she had been saying. How could she make me the villain in this situation? I only asked that she respect my personal space and refrain from tampering with my belongings. Was that really that irrational? But it didn't end there. She had apparently been telling everyone who would listen how cruel and self-centered I was. My husband was even contacted by some of her cousins, who wanted to know why I was treating his younger sister so badly. I was blown away. After everything she had done, it was almost remarkable how brave she was to play the victim. I believed that establishing limits would resolve the issue, but it simply became worse. I learned a few days later that my sister-in-law had taken things to the next level. She claimed that I allowed her to use my goods even though I knew they would damage her skin, as if I had given her the lotion and told her, "Here, ruin your face with this." It seemed unbelievable to me. They pretended that this was the scene of a crime. I realized then that I needed to take action to keep myself safe. This was no longer merely bothersome. It was becoming a full-fledged assault on my persona, and I was prepared to defend myself if they chose to escalate. That tumultuous family meal and the never-ending accusations left me exhausted when I woke up. Despite my best efforts to ignore it, the events of the previous evening kept coming back to me. My in-laws' inability to accept responsibility, my sister-in-law's charges, and the outright foolishness of it all. It enraged me. Even though I knew I wasn't at fault, I felt trapped in a circumstance where I had somehow turned into the antagonist in their tale. I had to take charge of the story before it got out of control anymore. I determined that speaking with my dermatologist was the best course of action. I needed professional guidance on how to defend myself against the unfounded charges my in-laws were making, in addition to helping me replace the prescription cream that had been squandered. I scheduled an appointment and went in the same day after my spouse concurred that it was a wise decision. In the dermatologist's office when I got there, I explained everything to the physician. My sister-in-law had rummaged through my things, used the cream twice without my consent, and because it wasn't intended for her, it had seriously harmed her skin. I also shared with them the drama involving my in-laws and the imminent danger of legal action. They were really understanding, even though I half expected them to think I was being theatrical. As I described, the doctor nodded and listened carefully. "This is actually more serious than you might realize," they added, leaning back in their chair when I was done. "According to them, you are not to blame for your sister-in-law's reaction. It's all the result of abuse. These are prescription-strength solutions made specifically for your skin type and condition. They are not intended for widespread use." They then offered to write me an official letter explaining that the drugs were safe to use as prescribed and that her misuse was the only reason for the negative outcome. Knowing that I would have the statement to support me, if things got out of hand, felt like a great weight being lifted off my shoulders. However, the doctor's next statement took me entirely by surprise. "You are aware that it can be considered medical theft if she uses your prescription medications without your consent." I blinked. Medical theft? Indeed. Prescription drugs are protected by law, they stated. There's a reason they're given to you and no one else. She might be reported to the police for intentionally taking and using your prescription medication, especially after you specifically warned her not to. It's more than a small boundary dispute. This is a significant issue. I took a time to process what they had said. Theft of medical records. It had such a hefty sound. I hadn't even considered formally submitting a police report for something similar. The doctor acknowledged my hesitancy by nodding when I informed them it seemed severe. Although it may seem drastic, this goes beyond the things she threw away or the harm to her skin. It's about self-defense, they claimed. They want you to repair the harm, and you already have to cope with charges and other legal dangers. It is difficult to reverse the effects of the medicine if they worsen. You could be protected by having this incident documented. I had a lot to think about, and the statement in hand as I left the appointment. The thought of submitting a report still made me uneasy. She hadn't broken into my residence or taken my credit card. However, my anger increased as I gave it more attention. This was no mere miscommunication or mishap. She wasn't some ignorant child who didn't understand. At 16, she was fully able to read labels and recognize limits. After the first occurrence, I had instructed her clearly not to use my prescription cream, yet she continued to do so. It wasn't a lack of knowledge. It was a matter of entitlement. It was even riskier. I would be facing much more serious repercussions if her response had been more extreme. I sat down with my hubby that night to discuss everything. I described the dermatologist's remarks regarding medical theft to him and showed him the statement. He was first apprehensive, fearing that proceeding this far may make matters worse. However, as we conversed, he came to the realization that we had to convey to his family the gravity of their behavior. At last he remarked, "Perhaps presenting them with this will cause them to retreat." They must understand that there are repercussions and that it is worthwhile if this causes them to reconsider. With his backing, we made the decision to confront them directly, armed with the dermatologist's declaration. It was time to face his family head-on. My husband and I agreed. Since all I had done was attempt to establish limits in my own house, I wasn't going to allow them to continue portraying me as the bad guy. We decided to have a serious discussion about what had transpired and our future plans when we met with them the next day. The tension was evident as soon as we entered his parents' home. With her face still a mess, my sister-in-law was sitting on the couch and browsing through her phone as if she had no worries at all. With kind but tense grins, my in-laws welcomed us, obviously anticipating a fight. "We must speak." With a tone that left no space for dispute, my spouse stated. My heart was racing in my chest as we all sat down in the living room. I took out the statement from the dermatologist. An expert in dermatology was consulted. Despite my nervousness, I started speaking steadily. They verified that the prescription cream's overuse was the cause of the response. The goods are not intended for use by others, but they are totally safe when used as instructed. To protest, my mother-in-law opened her mouth. I gave my sister-in-law a quick glance, but she avoided looking at me before continuing. Additionally, the dermatologist noted that it constitutes medical theft to use someone else's prescription medication without their consent. Boundaries are not the only issue. They are concerned about a legal matter. The man I was marrying leaned forward, his face hardening. "Are you threatening to call the police because of this?" Sharply, he asked. "We're not expressing a desire to submit a report." My spouse got right in. His voice was forceful but calm. "However, we're arguing that we might. Her skin damage isn't the only issue here. It concerns the fact that, despite being warned not to, she searched through my wife's personal items. Twice. That's intentional. It's serious, too. My mother-in-law came to her daughter's defense right away. She is just in her teens. She lost her temper. You're treating her like a criminal because she made a mistake." "She is 16 years old," I answered, maintaining a voice that was even old enough to operate a vehicle. "However, she lacks the ability to read labels and recognize fundamental limits. She is old enough to comprehend the fundamentals of property respect. She disregarded me when I warned her not to use the cream. It's not an error, it's a decision. Nevertheless, my father-in-law's tone was sharp. Sharp? It's family. Are you really going to use anything like this to threaten her? What is it over? A little cream and shampoo?" My husband interrupted their justifications by saying, "This isn't about the money. The primary is the subject. Instead of taking responsibility for her actions, Sarah has made this a disaster, even though she knew what she was doing. You've been holding my wife accountable for something that wasn't her fault. We'll take the necessary precautions to keep ourselves safe if you continue to spread this myth." After being silent up until this point, my sister-in-law suddenly spoke out. Although her voice sounded unsteady, she added, "I didn't mean for it to get this bad. I simply assumed everything would be well. I had no idea it would result in all of this." She sounded like the victim in her tone, and I was unable to contain myself any longer. "You didn't." "No," I responded, unable to believe it. "I warned you not to tamper with our belongings. You dug through my belongings twice even though I had put them away. And now when your skin responded, you're attempting to blame me for this. How fair is that? I wasn't attempting to do harm to anyone." "Defensively," she said. "However," I interrupted her, "no, you didn't mean to do harm to anyone. You were simply being careless and arrogant. And now, rather of taking responsibility for your actions, you have been lying to the family and attempting to paint me as the villain. That's not acceptable." Sarah averted her gaze, obviously uneasy, and my mother-in-law started to argue but apparently changed her mind. His parents were clearly unsure on how to react. They appeared to comprehend for the first time how bad things had gotten. We left their house without a true conclusion after a protracted and intense argument. My in-laws appeared alarmed by the prospect of us making a report, but they also refused to completely accept their daughter's behavior. In addition to not apologizing, my sister-in-law remained silent. Even though she didn't want to acknowledge it, It was obvious that she understood she had gone too far. The stillness was broken by my husband's sigh as we drove home. "They won't change," he stated in a sad voice, "but at least they understand our seriousness now. Whether they took responsibility, we had made it plain that we would no longer be bullied, and the confrontation had not been pleasant, but it had been essential." I was just beginning to unwind later that night when someone knocked on the door. My spouse and I looked at each other. We weren't expecting anyone, and it was late. My sister-in-law was standing there when I opened the door. She was sobbing, not peeling, which is why her face was red and blotchy. She didn't appear happy at all like the arrogant youngster who had rolled her eyes at me a few days before. She wasted no time at all. "May I enter?" Her voice trembled as she asked softly. I wasn't going to have this argument on the front porch, so I moved aside, not knowing what she was intending. My spouse remained close by, resting on the kitchen countertop. With his arms folded, he observed the events. She broke down once more as soon as she entered the living room. "Please." Through stifled sobbing, she spoke. "Don't, please." Filed a report with the police. All of this was not my intention. I didn't anticipate things getting this terrible. I remained quiet and let her speak. She continued by claiming that if I just let it go, she would reimburse me for the items that were wasted, and that she didn't want her parents to know how bad things had gone. I apologize. "All right," she begged. I paused at what she said, but not for the reason she likely wanted. It wasn't the promise to reimburse me or the apologies. Her framing was the reason. "Don't let this ruin my life." It wasn't about owning up to her mistakes or even admitting what she had done. She feared the repercussions. I apologized for her actions. I inhaled deeply to regain my composure before answering. "When things went wrong, you sought to paint me as the villain by ignoring my limits and disseminating false information. You're not a simpleton with no common sense. You are now dealing with the fallout from your actions, which you knew well what you were doing." She began to sob more loudly, almost howling, in an attempt to get my husband to pay attention. Playing the defenseless little sister role, she continued glancing at him in a frantic manner, as if pleading with him to intervene and save her. When it became evident that he would not support her, she snapped. "She's ruining everything," she said as she turned to face him. "You should leave her because she is a bitch." That was it. My remaining patience finally gave out. "Right now, are you kidding me?" I yelled, breaking through her pretense. "You enter my home, go through my belongings, tell lies to everyone, and attempt to damage my reputation, and now you're in my own house calling me a bitch." I didn't care that my voice was trembling with rage. I was going to stop allowing her to control the situation. She started to say something, but I spoke before she could. "Here, you are not the victim. Ever since you entered this house, you have been treating me disrespectfully. And you believe you can get here now? Turn my hubby against me and cry a little. Now get the heck out." Her mouth sprang open as if she was shocked that I dared to challenge her. With tears running down her cheeks, she turned to face my husband one more time. "Will you really allow her to speak to me in this manner?" she screamed, hoping he would support her, but he refused. "You must go," he replied in a stern voice. "She is correct. Instead of offering an apology, you're doubling down after crossing all the lines. She is not to blame for this. You own it." She appeared shocked into silence by it. After a minute of being still, she grabbed her suitcase and rushed to the door. "All right," she spit. She attempted to sound tough, but her voice cracked. "However, don't count on my forgiveness for this." I didn't even try to answer. She slammed the door behind her, and I simply stood there with my arms crossed. I muttered, "I'm done," as I turned to face my spouse. "She will never again enter this house." His face was tired as he nodded. "I understand," he responded. "You're correct, too. This must end." My husband and I went ahead and filed the police complaint the day after I evicted her. Her actions had given us no other option, even if I didn't enjoy having to go to that extent. I wanted the truth to be documented in case my in-laws continued to portray me as the bad guy. The procedure went more quickly than I anticipated. Sarah broke down almost instantly when the authorities questioned her. When questioned, she initially attempted to recite the same sob tale she had been telling her parents, but it was unsuccessful. She finally broke down and revealed everything. She admitted to purposefully searching through my drawers, disobeying my advice, and using my prescription medications twice. Then came the most painful part. She blatantly acknowledged that she did it only to annoy me. Her admission clarified everything. She and her parents could no longer claim that it was a harmless accident because the authorities found that her acts were intentional. They determined that the expense of the garbage and prescription medications had to be covered by her parents. The penalties for medical abuse, as well as the costs I had to pay a dermatologist to clean up the mess she had created, I believed that this would serve as the necessary wake-up call. They must have realized their mistake in defending their daughter once they heard her acknowledge that she had done all of this on purpose. I had hoped they would attempt to make apologies and apologize, but they didn't. They adamantly maintained that I was at fault. They didn't even try to fix the harm their daughter had caused or offer an apology. Instead, they pretended that I was the issue and completely ceased communicating with me. I could see how much it upset my husband to have his connection with his parents strained like this. Yet he was there for me through it all. Instead of acknowledging that he had chosen to defend me, they accused me of coercing him into siding with me. His family's villainization of me still hurt, even if it was consoling to know he was on my side. Nevertheless, if they chose to fabricate the narrative to comfort themselves, I knew I had done the right thing. They made that decision. I was going to stop allowing it to influence me. My sister-in-law hasn't talked to me since her confession, which is probably for the best, and they were ultimately compelled to reimburse me. She's ashamed, in my opinion, not just by what she did, but also by the fact that she had to deal with the fallout from her actions. I am certain that I made the correct decision, since failing to do so would have caused the situation to worsen, and maybe destroyed my marriage. I don't want her around me since she was rude and spiteful. But occasionally, I question whether I was too severe. Could I have handled it better? Or was it the proper decision to file the police report and go this far? Read it, please. Tell me the truth. Story 3. My daughter. Falsely accused me is the title of my story, which led to my lengthy incarceration. Now that I'm free, I will pay back all I endured with the same currency. Hello everyone. Prior to starting today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe, since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. I'm not even sure where to begin. It enrages me to write this. I must, however, get it out. My daughter. We will refer to her as Sarah. For years, there has only been difficulty. She seems to have been born to try my patience, and I'm not sure if that's because of the way we raised her, or if she's just wired this way. She is unappreciative, self-centered, and never accepts responsibility for anything. Things weren't always like this. She was nice when she was younger. Yes, it was a little obstinate, but I assumed it was typical child behavior. However, everything changed when middle school arrived. She began behaving as though she owed the world something, as if she were superior to everyone else. If she didn't get what she wanted, she would have tantrums, scream at us, slam doors, you name it. My wife said that it was only a phase. She'll get over it. She didn't. When Sarah reached adolescence, it seemed as though she had made the decision to ruin our lives. She told lies about everything, what she was doing, where she was, and who she was with. She was most likely lying if her lips were moving. She missed so many classes that we were summoned to a meeting by the principal. She just shrugged her eyes and replied, "Whatever, Dad," when I informed her that she needed to get in shape. She completely left high school at the age of 16. She said she was not returning to school one day when she got home. Foolish. "I don't need it," she said. My spouse and I pleaded with her to change her mind, but she didn't listen. Without even turning around, she said goodbye, gathered her belongings, and left the room. She fled with a loser of a lover who had no prospects or a job. Not even his name comes to mind. We didn't hear from her for 3 years. No texts, no calls, nothing. My spouse was devastated. Many evenings she sobbed herself to sleep, wondering if Sarah was all right and if she would return. I was relieved as well as outraged. The home was quieter without Sarah. No fighting, no drama. Perhaps this is for the best, I reasoned. Then she arrived at our home one evening. She was standing there with a garbage bag full of garments in her hands, all saturated from the intense rain. She said, "There's nowhere else for me to go." Before I could say anything, my wife hurried by me and dragged her inside, despite my initial impulse to slam the door in her face. Despite the fact that Sarah hadn't bothered to phone us in 3 years, she gave her a hug as if she had just returned from battle. "She is our daughter. We can't just leave her out there," my wife insisted. I knew it was wrong to let her remain, and boy, was I right. I first made an effort to be lenient toward her. Perhaps she changed. Perhaps her time apart had taught her anything at last. Not at all. She returned to her previous behavior in a matter of days. She didn't help out around the house or hunt for a job, did nothing but go through her phone while sitting on the couch. We would ask her to do something as easy as washing the dishes or taking out the garbage. When we asked her to move mountains, she would roll her eyes. "Why are you unable to accomplish it?" she would say. "I'm worn out. What is causing your fatigue? All day sitting on her ass." And there came the late nights after that. After supper, she would pretend she was going for a stroll and leave the home. However, she would be gone for hours. She would occasionally arrive home after midnight. When I inquired about her whereabouts, she would simply shrug and be silent, as if that didn't concern me. She would return grinning as if nothing had happened. Then she collapsed onto the couch and resumed browsing through her phone. My wife continued to make excuses when I tried to discuss it with her. "She has experienced a great deal. I just need time to adjust," she would reply. What should I adjust to? We went out of our way to accommodate her, but she spent the entire day sitting about behaving like the queen of the home. I couldn't stand it any longer one night. When Sarah eventually returned home after being out until 1 in the morning, I confronted her. "What on earth have you been up to?" I inquired. "Why do you care?" she asked, laughing. At that point, I advised her to either find another place to live or start doing her share of the work. What did she say? "You're meant to look after me." Parents act in this way. It seemed unbelievable to me. She believed we owed her something despite all she had done, including leaving school, fleeing, and ignoring us for 3 years. I decided I'd had enough at that point. I issued a command to her. She had 24 hours to gather her belongings and depart. I silenced my wife when she attempted to argue. She is an adult. I said, "She made her decisions. She needs to face the repercussions now." Sarah didn't believe me at first. "Yeah, okay, Dad," she answered, laughing, as if it had been a joke. However, her attitude shifted when she understood that I wasn't joking. She began to shout, "You are an awful dad." She let out a scream. "Do you not love me?" I told her what I had to say and held my position. She slammed the door so forcefully that the entire house trembled as she rushed off to her room. For the remainder of the day, my wife ignored me, but I didn't mind. I allowed Sarah 4 hours to go, but everything happened before that time had even passed. After another dispute with my wife about her enabling Sarah, I was sitting on the couch in the living room, attempting to unwind by browsing the news on my phone. Even though I was almost at my breaking point, I decided to wait until tomorrow evening. After that, Sarah would be permanently gone, and I would be able to return home. However, life has a humorous way of catching you off guard. The door was knocked on loudly. My heart raced with 3 sharp, fast bangs. The knock wasn't friendly. I stood up to respond. I felt my stomach turn to knots. 3 policemen were standing there when I opened the door. They're all looking very serious. "We are authorized to search your property, sir," one of them said. For a moment, my thoughts were blank. What? Why? An anonymous report regarding illegal substances being kept in this property was given to us. The officer clarified that your name is listed on the report. What's my name? My residence? I felt like the ground had suddenly been torn out from beneath me. I wanted to protest, to slam the door in their faces, but I knew it wouldn't get me anywhere. So I stepped aside and let them enter. Feeling a sensation of dread fell over me like a thick blanket. They spread out swiftly, one cop remaining in the living room as the others began searching the house. My wife stood transfixed in the corridor, her face pallid as a ghost. Sarah, on the other hand, sat on the couch absolutely unmoved. She even had the arrogance to sneer at me as the cops walked upstairs to inspect the bedrooms. I knew I didn't have proof, but I knew this was her doing. Who else could it be? She had been out late, sneaking around, hanging around with who knows. The only one who stood to benefit from this mayhem was her. Her room was searched first by the cops. As they went through her belongings, I watched from the doorway as they pulled the sheets off her bed, emptied out her backpack, and flipped through her drawers. However, they found nothing at all. I experienced a glimmer of optimism. Perhaps all of this was miscommunication. Sarah might not have done anything at all. After that, they proceeded to my room. They wouldn't find anything there, I thought. Why would they? I didn't have drugs in my home, and I wasn't involved in any criminal activity. However, one of the cops halted here after removing the mattress off my bed. He continued, displaying a bag containing what I knew right away to be heroin. The first heroin bag was held up by the constable. I looked at Sarah, expecting to see a look of surprise or perplexity. Rather, she grinned. She curled her lips into a look that made me shiver. She didn't recoil, didn't make any claims. She simply sat there as if this were all a game. When I realized she wasn't simply uninterested, my blood began to boil. She was pleased with her accomplishment. I was having trouble breathing. The walls seemed to be closing in on me. I don't own that. My voice trembled as I repeated it out of habit. The police, however, were not paying attention. By the time they finished their investigation, they had discovered many other suitcases concealed around the room and behind my bed. "Because you are in possession of a restricted drug, sir, you are under arrest." As they took off the handcuffs, one of them stated. My wife started crying. As though it were a movie, Sarah simply sat there and watched the entire thing. I gave her one more glance as they cuffed me and escorted me out the door, hoping to see a glimpse of regret or shame on her face. Rather, she grinned. The hours that followed were a haze. I was taken to the station, where I was fingerprinted and had my mug photo taken. No one paid attention to my repeated claims that the narcotics weren't mine and that I had been set up. The proof was beneath my bed at my home. For them, that was plenty. The quantity of heroin they discovered indicated that I was involved in distribution. Therefore, they refused to release me on bond. Despite my lawyer's best efforts, it was unsuccessful. For the following few weeks, I was confined to jail as the inquiry proceeded. They began investigating the matter. They examined the medicines for DNA, fingerprints, and other items that would connect them to me. However, nothing was present. There was no proof linking me to the narcotics, and the bags did not contain my fingerprints. That did not, however, absolve me of responsibility. Since the residence was registered in my name, I was accountable for the narcotics. My lawyer said they had to have been set there by someone else unless I could show otherwise, but without concrete proof. My word was in opposition to theirs. I recognized Sarah. I knew it was her, but I had no idea how she had done it. Perhaps I was unaware that she had been keeping the medications in my room, or perhaps she had hidden them there to retaliate against me for evicting her. She was the only one who could have done it anyway. While the lawsuit continued, I was imprisoned for 5 excruciating months. The court's timetable was backlogged, not because the inquiry was difficult or because there wasn't enough evidence to clear my name. Justice apparently had to wait. Even when someone's life was being ripped apart, it was their turn. The wait seemed to go on forever. In that confinement, each day was a new day. I sat thinking, going over everything again and again. The humiliation, the betrayal, the powerlessness, all of it kept repeating itself in my mind. Even though my body was imprisoned, my thoughts continued to pace. I kept thinking about how I had been harmed by my own daughter. While I was stranded in a place where I didn't belong, I wondered if she was laughing about it and carrying on with her life as if nothing had happened. During those months, my wife came to see me a few times, but even she seemed like an additional burden. She wasn't there to comfort or encourage him. Not at all. She seemed to be asking questions and looking for solutions I was unable to provide each time she visited. I needed her to support me and have faith in me. Instead, she appeared perplexed. After 20 years of marriage, she wasn't sure she could trust her husband. Why would Sarah act in this manner? During one visit, she inquired. She sounded uncertain, as if she was unsure of herself before she could even utter the words aloud. I made my fist so hard that my knuckles became white. "Do you know why?" I said, struggling to maintain my composure. "You've seen her personality. You have witnessed her deceive, control, and manipulate others to achieve her goals. This is nothing new." Her face was strained and pallid as she shook her head. "However, placing narcotics might result in your arrest. It's more than simply lying. That is, I'm not sure. It's wicked." She stared down at her hands, wringing them as if they held the answers, and her voice broke. I remarked sourly, "She's been on this path for years. You simply did not wish to witness it. You continued to justify her. She has experienced a great deal. You let her get away with it each time she stepped over the line. And now we're at this point." I didn't care that my words felt like a slap to her. I didn't want to soften the truth for her because I was too tired, too angry, and too broken. Perhaps I could have handled this better if she had supported me and had faith in me from the beginning. Instead, she persisted in questioning me, giving me the impression that I was the one being tried. During another visit, she said, "Perhaps you simply didn't understand what was going on." Her voice wavered. Perhaps. There might be more to this. I was astounded by her lack of confidence in me as I looked at her. "Are you even able to hear yourself?" I lost my temper. "You're my wife. I've known you for 20 years. Do you truly believe that I would do drugs? Would I truly risk everything, in your opinion? For what purpose? I have some heroin behind my bed." She didn't respond. Like a reprimanded kid, she sat there staring at the floor. Her silence, however, was quite telling. She didn't think I was real. Not quite. She may have wanted to, but she had misgivings in her heart, and those doubts were more profound than anything else. Knowing that Sarah had planned this was the worst part. It became more apparent to me as I gave it more attention. This was not a choice made on the spot. This was a premeditated move. Knowing that it would place the responsibility on me, she had taken the trouble to conceal the narcotics in my room. She made sure the cops had a reason to come with a warrant by reporting me anonymously. She had framed me in every way she could. It had also been successful. My own wife, however, was unable to notice it. Even my once visiting parents were unable to notice it. Some of my alleged pals even began to whisper behind my back and withdraw. Even if the evidence did not directly implicate me, the stigma associated with drug arrests was sufficient to cast suspicion on me. Doubt is also a potent force. It adheres to you like an unwashable stain. The court repeatedly postponed my hearing. All I could do was sit there in that jail and sulk. I reflected on all the times Sarah had deceived me and the opportunities I had given her that she didn't merit. She grinned as if she knew precisely what she was doing as the cops carried me away, and I thought about it. My wife was crying because she wasn't sure if she could trust me anymore, not because I was in jail. I was different from the person who had entered that jail 5 months prior by the time I eventually had my court date. I was less forgiving, more irate, and tougher. I had been let down by the system. My own daughter's self-centered behavior was the sole reason my family had let me down. The lack of fingerprints or DNA linking me to the pills, Sarah's messages, and the witnesses who observed her skulking around were the pieces of evidence that eventually surfaced. It seemed as though everyone had just realized I was here. The harm had already been done when the allegations against me were withdrawn. I had lost 5 months of my life. I was handled like a criminal for 5 months, doubted by those I believed to be my loved ones. Legally, my name could have been cleared, but I knew that I would never be the same on a social or emotional level. I wasn't only upset at Sarah. I felt resentful of everyone who had questioned my sincerity and abandoned me to languish in that cage, wondering whether I was the sort of man who would conceal drugs beneath his bed. And a seed of retaliation began to sprout in that rage. Sarah wasn't the only one I wanted to suffer the repercussions of her behavior. I wanted her to understand the experience of losing everything, to be viewed by the world as I had been viewed. I wanted her to cover the cost. Sitting quietly in the living room was the first thing I did when I arrived home. There was my wife, standing clumsily at the doorway as if she was at a loss for words. Perhaps she assumed I would be overjoyed to return, or perhaps she thought I would forget about everything and go on. But I felt a mixture of fury and betrayal every time I looked at her. "Why didn't you think I was real?" I broke the stillness by asking at last. I became even more irate when my voice cracked a little. I wanted to come across as powerful, not damaged. She took a while to respond. She wrung her hands and stood there. It was challenging. "All right. Your chamber had the medications. What should I have thought? I was meant for you to know. I lost my temper. I've known you for 20 years. You've seen Sarah's personality. But as soon as something negative occurs, you betray me. I didn't care that I was now raising my voice. I didn't do it, you know. You knew deep inside. You played mother to the person who really did this. But instead of supporting me, you let me rot in prison." Her eyes filled with tears. I wasn't going to feel sorry for her, though. She wasn't the one who had been treated like a criminal in a jail for months. It meant nothing to me. "But I'm sorry," she muttered. I didn't get the months I lost back with apology. I apologized, but it didn't change the fact that she had doubts about me when I most needed her. I attempted to put my life back together over the course of the following several days. At last, the inquiry had produced indisputable evidence that Sarah was responsible for everything. She had been distributing narcotics for months, if not longer, based on the text messages on her phone. She had been using our home as a hiding place, putting the heroin beneath my bed so I would be held accountable if something went wrong. The texts were devastating. They showed her working with a dealer, discussing product moves, and even joking that her father would never notice. My hands trembling with anger, I read each one of them. How could I have been harmed by my own daughter? To rescue themselves, what type of person puts up their own father? Additionally, witnesses reported to the police that they had observed Sarah skulking around late at night, meeting up with dubious individuals in alleyways and parking lots. Sarah boasted about storing narcotics in my house because she believed it was the ideal cover, according to one of her alleged acquaintances. I was both relieved that the police were finally pursuing the true offender and resentful that it had taken so long, and that I had to bear the consequences of her behavior when they eventually issued a warrant for her arrest. A few days after I returned home, Sarah was arrested. They discovered that she was living with a group of scumbags in a dilapidated apartment. More drugs, scales, baggies, and cash were discovered when the police searched the area. She was obviously not merely using. Her involvement in the drug trade was complete. I was hoping that seeing her arrested would help me feel better, but it didn't. It only made me more irate, if anything. When they took her away, she didn't appear afraid or embarrassed. She appeared irritated, as though she would have to put up with this inconvenience. When my wife learned of the arrest, she was devastated. We still consider her a daughter. Like a broken record, she repeated herself. Despite her mistakes, she remains our baby. It was more than I could handle. My daughter is not her. I lost my temper. No more. This is not what my daughter would do to me. To protect herself, my daughter wouldn't ruin her own family. The ensuing court proceedings were drawn out, taxing, and disorganized. Like everything else that was left behind by Sarah. She was charged with possession of narcotics, intent to distribute, and, maybe most terribly for me, false charges made against her own dad. Knowing that she had purposefully planned my arrest, that charge always felt like a kick to the belly when I heard it said out loud in court. Went over and above to set me up and watch me suffer, made me furious. It was overwhelming evidence against her. A damning picture was built by the witness accounts, the messages she exchanged with her supplier, and even her own negligence in hiding narcotics in her flat. Even if it was damning, It didn't help my situation. Every court appearance, every holdup, and every arrogant glance she gave when being questioned. Whatever remnants of humanity I still held onto were eroded by it. As a component of the inquiry, Sarah had to submit to a drug test. As expected, it tested positive for heroin as well as a number of other drugs, such as cocaine and amphetamines. The last nail in the coffin was that. The daughter I once trained to ride a bike and cuddled to sleep as a baby wasn't only a manipulator and a liar. She was a crook and an addict. I wasn't surprised by the findings, but it was painful. Knowing instinctively that your child is headed in a harmful direction was one thing. Seeing it written in black and white is a very different matter. I had a part of wanting to feel sorry for her, to believe that she is a victim of her own decisions. Anger, however, overshadowed that aspect of me. Her life wasn't simply damaged by her. She had attempted to destroy my. I couldn't avoid going to every hearing, even though my lawyer told me I wasn't required to. I had to look at her face. I needed her to understand that I would not allow her to escape punishment without witnessing the harm. She was the reason. During the trial, her attorney made the claim that Sarah's behavior was due to her addiction, that when she reported me to the police, she was not acting rationally. I was unable to remain silent. Not this time. I realized as I sat there that this was not some desperate, addiction-fueled error. It has nothing to do with weakness or poor judgment. It was deliberate. Family had never been her thing, only ever thought about herself. It has nothing to do with drugs. It has to do with retaliation. After I kicked her out, she tried to harm me and get me in trouble. That much was obvious. But because the truth was already out there for everyone to see, I kept those thoughts to myself. I didn't need to say anything. My words were not as loud as what she did. Procedural foolishness and Sarah's attorney's attempts to lower her charges caused the trial to drag on for months. I attempted to reconstruct the ruins of my life in the meantime. When I passed the area, people were still whispering. Despite the facts, some people are still questioning if I was actually innocent. My wife appeared to live in denial all the time. She is ill. She repeated it as if it were a mantra that would help her understand everything. It wasn't her intention. It wasn't her intention. One evening after supper, I lost it. She was well aware of her actions. She wasn't only being used, she was in business. She filed a police complaint with my name on it. How the hell are you not referring to that? Her parents are us. Regardless, her voice wavered. Not anymore, I muttered icily as I pushed my chair back and walked away from the table. The final result felt less like a win and more like a formality. Sarah was convicted on every charge: drug possession, intent to distribute, and making unfounded allegations. The magistrate didn't mince words. She was given an 8-year sentence to serve in a long-term drug rehabilitation facility rather than go to jail. According to the judge, treating her addiction was essential to making sure she didn't do the same thing again. As the sentence was read, she only shrugged slightly, as though to convey that it was what it was. I didn't experience the relief I wanted. The harm was already done. The 5 months I spent in a cell would not be forgotten in 8 years. It wouldn't repair the broken relationships or erase the blemish on my record. Her conviction was, if anything, the last chapter of a novel I wished I had never begun. I obtained a restraining order against Sarah following the trial to ensure that she would never be able to approach me again. I don't want her in my life, not even after she finally leaves. I made my decisions, and she made hers. I had trouble falling asleep for a long. I was plagued by all that had transpired, and I kept waking up in the middle of the night. In contrast, my wife appeared to be mired in the past. In an attempt to maintain a correspondence with Sarah while incarcerated, she began writing her letters. I remained silent at first, but finally it got to be too much. What do you want to achieve? When I saw her sealing another mail one evening, I questioned her. She is our daughter. The same broken phrase that had been driving me crazy for months was repeated by her. The day she placed me in handcuffs, she ceased to be our daughter. My voice was harsh and frigid as I answered. What she's going through doesn't matter to me. If she recovers, it doesn't matter to me. She is no longer in my life, and it isn't going to change. That exchange was the decisive moment. No longer were we in agreement, not even in the same book anymore. My wife held on to the notion that Sarah was the daughter we once knew, the infant she once held, the young girl she had reared. However, that Sarah was no longer there. Maybe not to anyone, but not to me. It became obvious that this was going to be too much for our marriage to handle. After months of uncertainty, resentment, and suffering, our mutual trust had been destroyed. My wife was attempting to maintain a connection with the person who had ruined all we had worked so hard to build, and she had questioned me when I needed her most. How were we going to recover from that? The solution was straightforward. We were unable to. I eventually stated it aloud one evening, during yet another heated fight over Sarah. We can't continue like way, in my opinion. Tears flooded my wife's eyes as she gazed at me. Are you saying that you wish to go? This isn't working, I'm saying. My voice was thick yet steady as I spoke. Before all of this, we were different people. You no longer understand me, and I don't trust you. In all honesty, I don't believe I could remain in this place with everything that makes me think of her. She wiped away her tears and nodded slowly. I understand, but I don't want this. A few weeks later, we decided to part ways. The home was hers, the one location I no longer wanted to be. I relocated to a modest apartment across town, which was near enough to manage the logistics of splitting our lives, but far enough away to give me the impression that I was beginning again. Although difficult, it was essential. The physical separation wasn't the toughest part. It was the knowledge that the life we had created together had fallen apart so thoroughly. After 20 years together, we had built a house and raised a family, only to have everything fall apart due to our daughter's behavior. Not only had Sarah's decisions eroded my faith in her, my marriage was ruined by them. Worst of all, it wasn't the trial or the jail time. It was the knowledge that my life was never as robust as I had assumed. I didn't even recognize it until it was too late that my marriage had been in danger. I might be able to let go of all this rage one day. Not today, though. My only goal for today is to keep moving forward and keep Sarah as far away from me as I can. She will have to live with the repercussions of her decisions. But I will too.